Two countries once went to war, not over oil, not over land, not over religion, over football. Well, kind of. Because underneath the football was something much darker. And the football was just the excuse everyone was waiting for. El Salvador and Honduras. Two small neighbors in Central America, with one massive problem between them. El Salvador was tiny and absolutely packed with people. No space, no land, no room to breathe. Honduras was right next door, bigger, emptier, and full of farmland just sitting there. So Salvadorians did what desperate people do. They moved. By the 1960s, around 300,000 of them had crossed the border, looking for a place to call home. 300,000 people. That is not immigration, that is a flood. Now Honduras had its own disaster unfolding. In 1963, a general named Osvaldo López Arellano got tired of waiting for power. So he just took it, staged a coup, threw out the elected government, declared himself in charge. But even dictators get insecure, so he held an election. He won, obviously. The opposition called it completely rigged. And then they pointed at something else. American banana companies had been quietly running Honduras for decades. The United Fruit Company, now called Chiquita, owned the land, controlled the ports, built the railroads, and had already helped overthrow a previous government in 1911, just to protect their fruit business. An American writer was so disgusted by the whole situation, he invented a phrase for it. Banana Republic. The economy was broken, the people were furious, and López Arellano needed a villain, fast. Here is something every failing leader eventually figures out. When people are angry at you, give them someone else to be angry at. López Arellano pointed at the Salvadorian immigrants and said, "They took your land, they took your jobs, they are the reason your life is hard." And just like that, families who had lived in Honduras for decades were being dragged off their land, beaten and pushed back across the border. Around 300,000 people, displaced, humiliated, sent home with nothing. El Salvador was furious. And then, football happened. It is June 1969. Both countries have qualified to face each other in the World Cup qualifiers. 3 matches. Winner goes to Mexico. Loser goes home. The first match is in Honduras. The night before, Honduran fans surrounded the Salvadorian team hotel. Drums, fireworks, garbage thrown at windows. Not a single player slept. El Salvador lost 1-0 in the 90th minute. Back home, a young woman named Amelia Bolaños was reportedly watching on television. The story goes she was so devastated, she took her father's pistol and shot herself. Now, historians have found 0 records confirming this ever actually happened. It was almost certainly fabricated. But the Salvadorian government did not care about the truth. They gave her a national funeral. The president attended. The football team marched. Fans carried her portrait to the next match. And that tells you everything about where things stood. The second match was in El Salvador. The Honduran team arrived to the same treatment. No sleep, hotel surrounded, objects thrown all night. Before kickoff, instead of raising the Honduran flag, the Salvadorians raised a dirty, torn rag in its place. El Salvador won 3-0. The Honduran team fled in a bulletproof bus with rocks raining down on them. Their coach reportedly told the players they were lucky they lost, because if they had won, they might not have made it out alive. The deciding match was played on neutral ground in Mexico City. El Salvador won 3-2 in extra time. They were going to the World Cup, Honduras was going home. And Honduras took its rage out on every Salvadorian still on its soil. El Salvador had seen enough. On the 14th of July 1969, Salvadoran jets crossed the border. First target, Toncontín Airport. Grounded the Honduran Air Force before it could even respond. Then ground troops poured across with tanks and infantry. They were moving fast, heading straight for the Honduran capital. The Organization of American States called an emergency meeting and told El Salvador, "Please stop." El Salvador said, "Not until they stop being jerks." So the war continued. Honduras eventually got its air force into the sky. With help from neighboring Nicaragua, they struck back, hitting Salvadoran oil facilities and military bases. The supply line collapsed. The advance stopped dead. Both sides were stuck, going nowhere. The OAS came back and offered a deal. They would personally guarantee the safety of Salvadoran immigrants. El Salvador accepted. Ceasefire. July 18, 1969. The war was over. It had lasted exactly 100 hours. 2,000 to 4,000 people dead, 300,000 displaced for a football qualification. The damage did not stop when the guns did. Trade between the two countries collapsed completely. The Central American Common Market, a regional economic union that had real potential, fell apart almost overnight. El Salvador came home to 300,000 refugees it simply could not support. The poverty and desperation that followed fed directly into the Salvadoran Civil War in 1979, a war that lasted 13 years and killed 75,000 people. Border disputes dragged on for decades and were only partially resolved by an international court in 1992, 23 years later. And El Salvador, the country that went to war to reach the World Cup, arrived in Mexico and lost every single game. Belgium 3-0, Mexico 4-0, Soviet Union 2-0, 0 goals scored, 9 conceded, last place in the group. They went home. So in the end, nobody won anything. Thousands died, 2 economies broke, an entire region was set back by a generation, all because a military dictator needed a distraction. And 2 nations loved football just enough to forget what was actually happening. The football war was never about football. It was about land, desperation, and a government that needed an enemy. Football just gave everyone permission to finally explode.